Welcome to the Willingboro Public Schools, where excellence is the expectation. Dr. Neely Hackett is our superintendent, and I am Siobhan Carter, the Supervisor of Guidance and Family Liaison, and I also serve as the Anti-Bullying Coordinator, or ABC for short. Today we will be discussing harassment, intimidation, and bullying. We call it HIB or HIB for short, the words and actions that try to rewrite our lives. You may be wondering, what is HIB? It can come in different modes. Firstly, it can be a gesture, a movement of part of the body, especially a hand or the head, to express an idea or a meaning. Secondly, it can be anything written, it can be verbal or a physical act, as you can see in these lovely pictures. Thirdly, it can be electronic communication, whether it's social media or something that they're using on their phone. And last but not least, it can be a single incident or it can be a series of incidents. Now we're going to discuss specific characteristics of HIB. Just to warn you, it is a very expansive list of characteristics, and we will see that on our next slide. What is HIB? It is reasonably perceived as being motivated by either an actual or perceived characteristic, such as race, color, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation. And what we want to notice here is the word perceived. So it can be something actual. So let's say a student is being, called names because of their specific religion. And let's say their family actually does practice that religion. That's an actual characteristic. But let's say a student walks around with sneakers and the sneakers are dirty, and the family does have a high income, but because another student's perception is that they are poor because of the dirt that's on their sneakers, that is a perceived characteristic. Next, we have it can take place on or off school grounds if it substantially disrupts or interferes with school operation or rights of other students. And a reasonable person should know that the acts will have an effect of physically or emotionally harming a pupil or placing that pupil in reasonable fear or harm. And has the effect of insulting or demeaning any student or group of students. And creates a hostile education environment for the pupil by interfering with the pupil's education, by severely or pervasively causing physical or emotional harm. So now we're going to look at some signs of bullying. Any significant change in behavior. It can be their mood, their eating habits, their sleeping patterns. They can also be withdrawn from family and social groups or friends. They can decline in school performance, or they could be visiting the nurse or different people within the school to try to avoid going to class. They can have lost, torn, or broken belongings, scratches or bruises, implausible excuses for any of the above. It's not always easy to tell if a young person is being bullied because sometimes they don't want to tell what's happening to them. Next, I want to talk about our duty to report. It is important that all staff, service providers, substitutes, board members, basically everyone that comes in contact with a student, that they know that it's important that they report bullying as soon as it is reported to them. Each incident must be reported to the principal or designee on the day that it occurred. Written documentation is required within 2 days, and a report also can be made anonymously. In addition to our duty to report HIB, here are some additional roles performed by designated staff members. Our first position is the District Anti-Bullying Coordinator, or ABC. The Supervisor of Guidance and Family Liaison serves in this position. In this position, they provide consultation to anti-bullying specialists, they track and report HIB data, they meet with the school safety team, and coordinate district HIB initiatives. Next, we have our school level anti-bullying specialist, or ABS. Typically in a school, it is the guidance counselor. It can be a different role in the school. They lead investigations of all reported incidents of HIB and serve as the chairperson for the school safety team. Next, we have our school safety team. It includes safe staff and parents. It is mandated to be put in place at each school. The team will review HIB data to develop, foster, and maintain a positive school climate. And this team meets at least twice a year. Now we're going to discuss the investigation process. So, firstly, the principal or designee or the anti-bully specialist receives the HIB incident. The principal calls the parents to inform them of the alleged incident. The ABS begins the investigation within one school day. The investigation is in process, so those directly involved are referred to as alleged bully and alleged victim. This is very important because if an investigation has not been conducted yet and someone is calling students a bully or a victim, technically their actions could be seen or taken as an act of bullying. So it's very important that we use alleged versus calling someone, a person, a bully or a victim when an investigation hasn't been conducted. Friendly reminder. Disciplinary consequences or remediation can be assigned prior to the completion of the HIB investigation when the act violates the district student code of conduct. The building principal assigns these as the person primarily charged with maintaining the safety of his or her school. So sometimes in the middle of an investigation, you can notice that some students may have detention, some students may have peer mediation, they may have been suspended, depending on what the actions were that took place in the incident. Next, the anti-bully specialist has a very expansive list of things that they are supposed to do. So firstly, they interview all parties involved, including witnesses. They provide support to the alleged victim. They carefully examine the facts. And they notify the principal of the results of the investigation using the district form. They also collaborate with the administrator to determine if the incident is in fact HIB. And the anti-bully specialist will also maintain confidential documentation of all witness statements. They will be locked in a file cabinet in the order of report number, and they will notify parents of victim and aggressor when investigation has concluded. They will not provide any specific details. The investigation must be completed within 10 school days. And we want to note the fact that it says school days. So, for example, let's say a report is handed in, whether it's verbal or written, and it's the day before winter break. Technically, that's day one, but day two doesn't start until school reopens. So we want to take note that it is a school day versus a Monday through Friday. We want to look at the calendar. Next, the principal also has quite a bit of responsibilities in the investigation process. The principal will review and co-sign the completed investigation form, determine discipline or remedial action, forward district forms and supporting documentation to the superintendent via the district anti-bullying coordinator within 1 day, and the ABC or anti-bullying coordinator will forward those forms to the superintendent within 24 hours. Next, superintendent also has an important role in this process. The superintendent reviews the results of the investigation, reports the results to the Board of Education at the next regularly scheduled public meeting, provides a written decision to the parents of the parties involved within 5 school days. It's also known as the 5-day letter. Next, the Board of Education has a role as well. At the next board meeting, the board will vote, and they will either affirm, reject, or modify the superintendent's decision. A copy of that decision will be mailed to all parties, and they will hold a hearing within 10 business days should a parent or staff member request it. Friendly reminder, there's an appeal process. So parents may request a hearing from within 60 days of receiving the superintendent's letter. They may appeal the Board of Education's decision with the Commissioner of Education within 90 days of receiving the letter from the Board of Education. Now we're just going to talk about our reporting requirements. Data on reported incidents of HIB will be provided to the Board of Education and the community at a public meeting, which will be held twice a year between September 1st and January 1st, and between January 1st and June 30th. The superintendent will also report on all acts of violence and vandalism at these meetings. Next, HIB information shall also be reported via the school safety data system once during each reporting period between September 1st, January 1st, and between January 1st and June 30th. And all this information goes to the Department of Education. The school safety team will print, review, and complete a hard copy of the HIB self-assessment. Basically lets us know how we're doing as a school as we're handling HIB in our schools. The ABC and superintendent will review the HIB grades using the annual self-assessment completed by each ABS or anti-bully specialist. After preliminary HIB grades are presented to the Board of Education, the final submission will be sent to the Department of Education for an official grade report. And that grade report will be placed on our website. So we've learned a lot of information. We talked about bullying and safety teams and allegeds and mandates and appeals. So when we receive a report, the question is, how do I determine if it actually is HIB? Good question. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Steps to determining HIB. So step 1, actual or perceived characteristic. We talked a little bit about that. So you want to see if there is an actual or perceived characteristic. Is there a distinguishing characteristic, whether it be gender, sexual orientation, mental or physical disability? What are the actual distinguishing characteristics? Is it a birthmark, weight, or hair texture? What are the perceived distinguished characteristics, whether it be promiscuity or poverty? Once an actual or perceived characteristic is determined, the next factor that must be considered is the balance of power. And that brings us to step 2, imbalance of power. In this chart, you will see the difference between conflict and bullying. On the left side, you'll see conflict. On the right side, you'll see bullying. So we're just going to go through the different areas. So the first area talks about a balance of power. As you can see, for conflict, it's equal power. For bullying, it's an imbalance. Next, we're going to talk about intentions. For conflict, typically it can be accidental. For bullying, it can be purposeful. Next, we're going to talk about a level of competition. For conflict, the competition is mutual, so it's for both sides. For bullying, it's one-sided or lopsided. Next, we're going to talk about the emotional reaction. On the left side, both parties are either frustrated or upset or angry or sad. And in the right side, again, it's lopsided. So you have one person or one side of the challenge being completely affected emotionally. Next, we're going to talk about what is being sought. So in a normal conflict, they're not necessarily seeking power or attention or things, but in bullying, power and control are being sought, and it's often being done in an aggressive manner. And last but not least, we'll talk about remorse. For a normal conflict, remorse takes in that place. The student takes responsibility. On the right side, you'll see for bullying, oftentimes there is no remorse, and sometimes you'll even see that the actions may be seen as manipulative. Now we're going to discuss the ways the district is being. If an actual or perceived characteristic is identified and there's an imbalance of power, there is a strong evidence of a HIB incident in the school. That brings us to step 3. If the behavior occurs off of school grounds, does it substantially disrupt or interfere with the orderly operation of the school or the rights of the other students? Again, we're going to look to see if it substantially disrupts. So one example is, let's say two students are having a challenge over the weekend on a Saturday, and one student says something to them or posts something on social media. So now Monday has come, the students are in school, both parties have talked to their friends about it. The student that received the words that weren't so very nice about them is now hearing about it as they're walking down the hallway. Multiple students are talking about it, and that student is feeling, and they feel like they're being insulted. They have like an emotional reaction to it, and so now it has leaked over into the school because that incident, even though it started on a Saturday, now the fact that it's happening and it's affecting the student and how their educational environment is set up, now it is a part of the school's responsibility. So just friendly reminder, step 1, actual or perceived characteristic is our first step. Second step is imbalance of power. And last but not least, if it occurred off school grounds, we want to determine if it substantially disrupts or interferes with the orderly operation of school. Now we're going to talk or discuss the ways the district is being proactive as it relates to HIB. So for prevention, we make sure that we work very hard as educators to have a positive classroom environment. We focus on relationship themes. So every month we're, talking and making sure that we're working with students on different relationship themes, whether it be responsibility or respect. We focus on student engagement, making sure that the students are very immersed in the lessons and that they're not just spectators, but they're active participants in their educational experience. We make sure that it's relevant and rigorous instruction. So we're not giving someone that's working on a second grade level grade 1 work. We're making sure that we're challenging them and pushing them to the next level. Next, we have a lot of positive behavior support systems in our schools, whether it be reward systems for being caught doing great things at the school level. And we have restorative practices. And last but not least, we have staff presence. And so just being present and making sure that we are intentional about how we interact with the students, letting them know that we care about them, and also making sure that we are a model for them to follow. We are also being proactive by promoting a positive culture in our schools through awareness of the new HIB policy and procedures. Annually, we disseminate those things to the school, to their parents, to students and staff. We post our HIB policy and anti-bully specialist information on the district and school websites. We provide HIB trainings to parents, substitutes, bus personnel, and volunteers. Next, we have student awareness and HIB intervention. During the first 2 weeks of school, we provide classroom and or small group assemblies to train students. And we also have a week of respect and a week of violence awareness in October. As you can see, the school district spends a lot of time providing preventative steps to stop HIB before it happens. We are also getting the word out in these ways. So, our awesome principals ensure that all staff members are trained and familiar with the HIB policy and school procedures. They also submit a signed form to the superintendent attesting to the fact that all staff members in the building have been trained. All staff members are mandated reporters and subject to disciplinary action for failure to report an incident of HIB. So we have things in place that make sure that accountability is high on our priority list. We include it in our student handbook. We include it on school and district websites. We distribute information to staff, students, and parents. We train new staff throughout the school year. So now that we've gone through all of these different things and all the ways in which we prevent them, now let's talk a little bit about how we support our students should HIB occur. And so we have a range of remedial measures. We have mediation where students can talk it out. We have restitution and restoration, whether it be, for instance, if a student damaged a book bag, making sure that that book bag is replaced. And for restoration, it would just, setting the stage and setting a place where a student can understand how their actions have affected other people. They can have a behavioral assessment to see if maybe there are some things we need to put in place at the school level. We can also do a behavioral management plan, which we also call a BIP or a behavior intervention plan, where we sit and we look at what the triggers are and to try to help the student by supporting them and putting a good plan in place. And we also have counseling. So whether that counseling is being provided by the guidance counselor, which is a brief session, or if it's an ongoing counseling that's needed, that's something that we can connect the parents with our in-school program, or we can refer to different agencies within the community. So let's review. So, speaking of counseling, if HIB is substantiated, the victim and offender will be referred to the Student Assistance Coordinator within 48 hours. The offender will receive the appropriate disciplinary action if it is warranted. Now we're going to discuss another role, the bystander. And bystander is actually exactly what it says, someone that is standing by. So when a HIB incident is recurring, oftentimes there are other people standing around that are seemingly uninvolved. I say seemingly because they actually have a role. Either they can be a bystander or they can be an upstander. And we will talk a little bit about that later. But if they are being a bystander, are they laughing on the side, which is now creating a hostile environment? Are they, ignoring it when they could go and talk to a trusted adult? Or are they standing up for that student? So the district policy indicates that a student may be found to have committed an act of HIB without being the one who performed the overt act. So it is important that we inform our students and train them and help them to understand that even though they are standing by and they seemingly are uninvolved, they technically have a role. They don't necessarily have to put themselves in harm's way, but they can definitely go and, get help from a trusted adult. And if they are concerned about doing that because they think there's going to be retaliation, we have something in place to make sure that students are held accountable if they retaliate against someone that is either a victim or a witness. And so sometimes those consequences can be harder and higher than the original incident of HIB. Next, we are going to talk about an upstander. And it's exactly what it says, someone that stands up. It is a person who speaks or acts in support of an individual or cause, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of a person being attacked or bullied. Every single day, we each have the opportunity to make our schools and our world a better place. Putting an end to bullying is everyone's responsibility. Working together, we can stand strong against bullying by creating communities that are stronger, safer, and more supportive places where every person is valued for who they are. And so when we were talking on the other, slide about being a bystander, this is what we want to encourage our students to be upstanders. Now, let's review some animated scenarios.